Okay, so I've added a few things to my outline. Can you guys all see this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I added in a hook and an intro to the topic. So if you remember, my thesis was that in this sonnet, Shakespeare uses all of those things to show that no matter how difficult life seems, the love of one person is enough to make life worth living. And so it is human nature to sometimes feel as if the world is just too much to bear. We experience tragedy and see injustice and might sometimes feel as if there's no hope left. Often just knowing that we are not alone is enough to push us to persevere another day. So do you guys see how I'm not jumping right in and saying in Shakespeare's sonnet, or I'm going to talk about Shakespeare today? I tried to think about, okay, how can I connect that theme of the poem to the people who are reading this paper? How can I make it something that's applicable today? Does that make sense? So you want to try to do that for your hook. And then if you look at the intro to the topic, that's kind of a bridge between that hook and your thesis. So while we might think this is a modern experience, Shakespeare's Sonnet 66 proves that there really is nothing new under the sun. Okay, right. So that intro to topic is really just a bridge, connecting that first thought to your thesis and making sure that you have the author and the title of the poem that you're looking at. So I didn't put in Shakespeare's first name here because it's Shakespeare. We don't ever refer to him by his first name, but for you guys, for your poet, you want to put in the first name. And that's the only time in your paper you will refer to the author's first name. The rest of the paper, you'll just refer to the author by his or her last name. And that's just a convention. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this outline and I'm going to save it as a new document. So actually I need to save it as I need to outline first because I never did that. Okay, so now I'm going to, before I do any more changes to this document, I'm going to save it again. So why is it doing that? Okay, it kind of knows what I want to do, I guess. So we'll try the save a copy thing. And so then I'm just going to change the outline to rough draft. And then let's see what document this. Okay, so then see how that changed the name of this to rough draft?
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to make sure that that happens because that way if you get off track or something, you can always go back to your original outline. If you don't do that and you just overwrite everything on your original outline, then there's no way to go back and just kind of follow your train of thought. So obviously we're going to put draft here instead of outline. And then in a draft, we don't have any of these numbers or letters, right? So I'm just going to get rid of all of those. I don't need to say intro to the topic or hook, so I can get rid of all of that stuff. Okay, so there I have my introduction. So that's pretty simple. And then I'm going to leave the background paragraph because I'm pretty sure you guys can figure out how to do that. So we're going to not worry about that. So what I've done is I did a kind of a sample paragraph so that you guys could see what our goal is for the body paragraphs. So right now, we're just going to work with the poem. We're not going to look at our outside sources yet. We're only going to use our poem because one of the main goals here is to be able to talk about the theme and the elements of poetry. And so we're going to focus on that. And then once we've got that all done, then we'll go back in and we'll add in some quotes from our outside sources. Okay. So my first point here was about the emotional plea. So I'm going to just delete that. And I already have one paragraph done here. So Sonnet 66 begins by making an emotional plea for rest from the hard things of life. So two things I want you to notice here. First off, the words emotional plea match. So if you look at what I said in my thesis, it matches what I say in my topic sentence. So this is something that I try to say as often as I can. Your thesis is like the roadmap or the directions that you give your reader for where you're going to go in your paper. So if you imagine giving someone directions and you tell them, turn right on Washington, turn left on Lincoln, and then you're like, well, that just seems boring. If the street name is actually Washington, I'm going to call it George instead to make it more interesting. They're not going to know where to turn. If all of a sudden they come to a street sign and you told them to turn right on Washington and the street's name is George, it's not going to make sense. They're never going to find where you're going. So it's really important to make sure that these things match and that they go in the right order, because it's the same thing. If actually you were supposed to turn left on Lincoln first, again, they're not going to find where they're going because they're going to be looking for whatever you said was first. So our brains like to put things in an orderly fashion. So putting all of your points in your thesis in this way and then following your plan through your paper helps readers' brains to process what you're saying, and it helps them not to get distracted, because if something doesn't match, then they have to stop and figure it out, and we don't want them to do that. All right, somebody needs to mute themselves. I hear some weird. There we go. Nope, it's back. I don't know what that is, but there it is. Okay. So we have the topic sentence, and then we have an introduction where we have the quote. So the first line says, "Tired with all these, for restful death I cry." And then I have the citation and then the explanation. So in this line, we see a desperate cry for help. The author is so tired of the world around him that he is asking for death. He adds emotion by using the word cry, which makes the plea more emphatic, while also reminding readers of weeping. This brief plea creates an emotional appeal to the reader to sympathize with the weight he feels. Okay, so you have your topic sentence, then you have your support, which is the quote, and then you have your wrap up, which explains why this quote is important, why this point is important. Okay, does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
And note that the quotes all have an introduction, so I'm not just going to throw a quote in there without saying where it came from. And then I explain what the quote means. So that's what I want you guys to do. So if we look at irony, I'm just going to pull up the where is it? Okay. So if we look up the irony paragraph, you can see I have kind of the same thing. I don't know why I don't want to do that. Continuing into lines 2 and 3, Shakespeare uses irony to describe everything he sees wrong in the world, showing how often life is unjust. Okay, so here's my topic sentence, which I need to indent. So just notice how I'm just getting rid of that numbering. And then I have, here's my support. The word as leads us into his list, telling us these are his examples of the ways the world has gone awry. First, he notes that often the people most deserving of honor are born beggars. And then I give the quote. In other words, the person who deserves honor is born to poverty rather than to royalty. So do you guys see how I'm introducing the quote, then giving the quote, and then explaining the quote? And so that's what you want to do throughout your paper. So then you end up with the rest of that paragraph. Oops. Okay, so as you go through your paper, that's what you're going to do, is kind of, you just do the same thing over and over again. You're going to go back to whatever the thing is. You guys all hopefully did this part where you put quotes. And so let's see, here's the Ascendenton paragraph. So you guys can see I do the same thing again. So you introduce what's going on. Here's the Ascendenton, which is the same thing that I said in the beginning. And all that is just repetition, basically. So by beginning each line with the word "and," he effectively creates a very long sentence that continues to stack one injustice on top of another. Not only does this connect the ideas together, but it has the effect of making the reader feel just as tired as the speaker does in the first line. It's not just one thing that bothers him, but this giant stack of injustice that is weighing him down. By connecting the ideas with and instead of simply using new sentences, he adds weight to the list. All right, so we would just continue doing that all the way through the rough draft. Okay, so eventually you end up with this draft that has all of your argument here. Okay, but the only work that you've cited so far would be the actual author. Okay, so once you get to this point, now you go back through and you look for ways that you can enhance your current argument with the sources that you have. So by doing research first and reading those sources and really thinking about them before you make your outline, your brain has already made some connections that will help it to make it more natural to put those sources in. So I have somewhere, I think right here. So here is my research journal. And so I have some quotes here that we're just going to try to put those in. So when we start putting in these quotes from our outside sources, we want to do this, follow the same formula. We want to introduce the quote, give the quote, and then explain the quote. So we want to make sure that every quote is surrounded by our own words. We don't want to end a paragraph with a quote, start a paragraph with a quote. We always want our words to be more important. So we're using the quote to support what we're saying, not just throwing quotes in there just so that it looks like we're using a source, okay? So since I'm going to use these sources, you guys already should have these in your paper. I'm actually going to shut this one down. Okay, so in my works cited, I already have all my sources here. So I already know that if I'm going to quote something from Bevington, I'm going to put Bevington in parentheses. So here I have a quote: "The worry consensus of most scholars is that the sonnets were written over a number of years, before 1598, but some perhaps later, and even up to the date of publication in 1609. So here's the deal with Shakespeare. So Shakespeare was a playwright, right? He's most famous for his plays. So he wrote plays to make money. That was his whole career, was he did that in order to make money. But sonnets were started to become kind of the thing to do. It was like the trend or the fad of his day. But he didn't want to seem too eager to be a part of that trend. So he didn't publish any of his sonnets himself. They weren't published until 1609. So most of them were probably written in the 1500s, like before 1598, but they were published in 1609. But even though they were published in 1609, he didn't publish them. So we have no idea if they're actually all his. We don't know if they were, who they were written to, what order they were written in, when they were actually written. We don't really know anything about his sonnets aside from conjecture. So this is kind of what people think, but it's not necessarily always the case. But so where would a quote like this probably fall if I'm looking in my paper? What part of the paper would that fit into?
I don't know.
You don't
Background.
know? Background, yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to take this, even though I haven't really written my background paragraph, I'm going to add this quote in right here so that I know, hey, that's going to work really well there when I talk about the background of the author. So you guys might want to, have that written first, but just in case. So then we have love and friendship are a refuge for the poet faced with hostile fortune and an indifferent world. Okay, so here's, so as I'm going through here, I'm talking about all of these things. And then maybe, I'm thinking maybe I need to go back to my actual thing. Let me go ahead and put the rest of, this in there. Okay, so in my conclusion, Shakespeare gives an important reminder: the relationships we have are more important than anything else. So that is where I think this quote makes sense. Love and friendship are a refuge for the poet faced with hostile fortune and an indifferent world. So what I want to do here is say something like, oops, as Bevington notes, and I can put in that quote. And then I have to fix my formatting because it messed all up. And this is supposed to be on a new page. Okay. All right. So do you see how that kind of fits right in with my argument right there?
Yes.
And it's still surrounded by my own thoughts. Okay, so some of these other things are really, I could try to figure out how to fit those into here too, but I think probably the English form, I could maybe fit into somewhere, thinking maybe here, maybe this, the irony of life, I don't know, somewhere. But can you guys see how, okay, I found these quotes and I was able to put them into my paper. So then I go through each of my sources and kind of look at the quotes and what I found and see, okay, well, where does that fit into my argument? Where can I use a quote that will help make my argument even stronger? Because it's not just me saying this. So like here in my conclusion, it's not just me saying this, it's actually what other people have said about him as well. And if I look at this and I think, you know, like really, is that a good conclusion? Because my conclusion, what I had so far, really is the last part of the poem where he kind of brings his theme out. So probably that shouldn't even be my conclusion. I should have another paragraph that's my conclusion. Does that make sense to you guys? Can you guys see why that would be?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what I would do is go through all of my other sources and just kind of take a look and see, okay, where can I add in more quotes? And you guys can see how as I do that, I'm adding length to my paper. So just my analysis of the poem's theme was probably, I don't know, 3 pages. So maybe you get 2 pages or 2.5 pages or something like that, just analyzing the poem's theme. Once you start putting in your outside sources and that background paragraph and all of those things, you're going to help grow the length of your paper, not by just like trying to make it longer, but because you're adding depth to it. So if you find yourself short on length, think about where can you add more depth? Do you have enough quotes from the poem? So I have basically quoted almost the entire poem in my paper. So unless your poem is pages and pages long, you probably want to do that. You want to see that most of your poem is represented in your paper.